Hello, everybody. It's Brian Daitzman, editor-in-chief of The Intellectualist and host of History of the Present. This is a long-form interview series produced in partnership with Lincoln Square. History of the Present explores all the major forces reshaping our world in real time, whether it's AI, climate change, energy, democracy, geopolitics, technology, inequality, or the future of the international order. The goal is simple for this show. We would like our audience to better understand the inflection points that we're experiencing today. Today, our guest is Ramez Naam. Ramez is a computer scientist, climate tech investor, energy futurist, and founder and managing partner of Planetary VC, and an award-winning author of 5 books, including The Infinite Resource and the Nexus Trilogy. Early in his career, he spent 13 years at Microsoft, where he worked on major products, including Outlook, Internet Explorer, and Bing. Today, his work sits at the center of some of the most important questions of our time: climate, energy, AI, technological acceleration, and whether innovation can help societies build a more abundant future. Ramez, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Brian, it's a delight. Thanks for having me. I'm doing well, thanks.
Great. Well, listen, before we start, I want to play 3 short clips, and I want to show you a screenshot from Bloomberg of our strategic oil reserve. So the first clip, just to kind of center this for everyone, is ABC News. They're discussing the Strait of Hormuz. And what ABC News is reporting is that the Strait of Hormuz is not open. An additional clip from the BBC is going to discuss the extreme heat waves affecting large parts of Europe. Europe, unlike the United States, has not broadly adopted air conditioning, so that's a genuine challenge. And a third clip is from Drop Site News. And in this clip, the President of the United States explicitly states that we are facing a catastrophe because we only have 4 weeks left of fuel in terms of our reserves. And he was saying this as a means of defending himself for seeking a peace deal with Iran that many criticize as catastrophic for America's national security interests. And so let's get this started. Sean, let's start with the first clip. Let's start with the BBC.
Banned from a festival in France because the weather is so hot. Around half of the country is under a red heatwave alert, as temperatures could reach record highs. At the annual Fête de la Musique, a national music festival that draws millions to the streets across the country, the government banned booze to allow medical staff to focus on caring for the most vulnerable. Schools have closed, some are letting pupils leave early, and parks in Paris are staying open throughout the night to help people cope with the heat. Some parts of France are expected to go above 40 degrees Celsius on Monday, and it's a similar story across Europe, including in Italy and Spain, which is also experiencing intense heatwave conditions.
And let's show the ABC News clip as well.
The US-Iran deal is just 3 days old, and it's already fraying. Reopening the Strait of Hormuz was the key benefit that the U.S. got from this whole deal. But today, Iran says it's closing it again, citing Israel's strikes on Lebanon. Iran is calling this a blatant breach of the first clause in the deal, the one that says the fighting has to stop on all fronts. But Lebanon is saying that at least 16 people were killed in Israeli strikes today. That's less than 24 hours after a ceasefire was announced. Here's the thing, though, when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. military is disputing what Iran is saying, claiming that Iran does not control the strait and that traffic continues to flow. Now,
and here's this last clip, and this is important. So this is the President of the United States. He's defending this deal that has been heavily criticized by U.S. allies as well as national security hawks in the United States, who say that the president has essentially created a deal with Iran that will lead to more terrorism and essentially lead to more conflict.
Bad press, I know that. Now, if I did the opposite, if I went out and continued to bomb them for another 4, just bomb the hell out of them, I'd get bad press on that. No, there's nothing I can do. But what this does is it allows the ships to go. If we keep bombing, those ships won't be going. And you're talking about $500, $600, $700 million a day. It's a lot of money, a lot of money. That's why the world is okay. It's liquid, it's fine. Also, we run out of reserves in about 4 weeks. You know, there are reserves all over the world, and we would really run out. And there'll be a time when you wouldn't be able to get it. And you want to see Bedlam? So for all those so-called geniuses that want to show me how smart they are, ask them why didn't they blow up General Soleimani? Ask that of the general and a couple of other people that I like very much, but boy, are they wrong. Go ahead.
And let's just take this so people have an understanding of where we are in terms of the strategic oil reserve. Sean, let's just show that last one. Okay. Ramez, thank you so much for having you here, and thank you for watching all those clips. I mean, what do you think is a thorough line between the first clip, we're seeing this great heat wave. They're basically, there's these public festivals, they're telling people to drink lots of water, not to drink. And then you're seeing this other sort of related thing going on with Hormuz, and the president explicitly saying we have 4 weeks left of oil. And now we're seeing on Bloomberg is something suggesting that could be accurate. Now, the president of the United States says a lot of things. A lot of them are not honest, but there are a lot of experts who have said similar things. Ramez, if you could tell our audience, what does this moment mean to you?
Well, there's a lot going on, and it means multiple things. I mean, look, climate change is real. We have, 1.3, 1.4 degrees C of warming in a transient way. And that's why you see that 40 degrees C for Americans, that's 104 degrees Fahrenheit in countries that have 5-10% penetration of air conditioning. It's just brutal. Like, that will cause Europe to adapt. But in the meantime, it's brutal. It's going to kill people. And temperatures are just going to go up from here. We won't have that sort of heat wave every year, but they'll get more and more and more common. And then the thing about Hormuz is, well, I think the president's wrong on how much oil reserve time we have. The major release, actually, the major entity that has kept oil prices down is actually China, releasing from their oil reserves, which are the largest on Earth. But regardless, while the price impact on oil from the Strait of Hormuz being closed has been smaller than almost anyone expected it to be, because of releases from the US and allies, and especially China releasing 4 million barrels a day. Nevertheless, it is going to accelerate the clean energy transition as countries' middle powers and medium income nations see that depending on oil is just a risk factor. And that is going to drive both national policy and consumers to go electric. We are looking at a peak of oil demand arriving as soon as 2030 or as late as 2035. That doesn't mean oil demand will be done, but that will shift oil from being a continuous growth market to a market where demand is declining. And capital chases growth, talent chases growth, political power chases growth. When the oil industry starts shrinking, it will lose a degree of power, and prices will have downward pressure on them forevermore.
And thank you for that response, and also discussing the sort of the geostrategic in terms of China's reserves. In terms of Americans consumers, right? We're coming right to a July 4th holiday. There's going to be Labor Day weekend. There's going to be a lot of driving during the summer in the United States. And I'm curious. Assuming there is a shock in oil, there already is. Where do you see prices going? In terms of consumers, do you see this becoming? Do you see this possibly becoming something that could lead to a recession?
It's possible. Oil price shocks have driven a large number of recessions in the past. At the same time, I'm not as terrified of this as some others. Like, I think it's a real risk. I think it's exerting a negative drag on U.S. and global GDP growth right now. And China has done the U.S. a favor by making up a good chunk of that missing oil, which they can do for several months, honestly, but not forever. Nobody can do it forever, and no one's going to let their oil reserves go to zero. Look, predicting the price of oil in the short term is a fool's errand, to be totally honest. Like, almost nobody gets it right. But yeah, I mean, if oil prices spike, to 150 a barrel, if gasoline goes to $7, $8 a gallon, you will see that exert a downward pull on the economy. Now, that said, in the 1970s, when we had the oil embargo from the Middle East, to now, the fraction of global GDP that is related to oil has shrunk by 60%, or just spending on oil versus global GDP is now 0.4, 40% of what it was in the 1970s. So I think that's also a manner in which we've decoupled, not because we use less oil, we use more oil, right. But the services economy has grown much faster globally. Pharma, things like that are less oil dependent. So you'll see a more specific sectoral impact. You see the impact on airlines, you see the impact on transportation and physical goods more than you see it totally economy-wide at this point.
Ramez, I mean, kind of, what do you consider energy security in 2026?
You mean energy security? Look, there's economic energy security is sort of a myth. But physical energy security is something the U.S. largely has, which is really in a crisis, a much worse crisis than this. The U.S. can just get by, all right? The U.S. produces enough oil that we could power our economy that way. We produce a surplus of natural gas, which we export. We have renewables, we have nuclear, we have coal, all of this stuff. Most countries don't have that good fortune. China does not have that good fortune, right? China was importing about 12 million barrels a day of oil before this crisis, but they'd also built a 1 billion barrel strategic reserve. And now that the Strait of Hormuz is closed, they're importing about 8 million barrels. So China is dependent upon the outside world. And so you look at China's strategy. Why has China gone all in on electric cars? I think a number of reasons. Air pollution is actually a threat to the Chinese Communist Party's legitimacy. It's an industry they can dominate. They're good at that sort of manufacturing, but also they don't want to be dependent upon imports. Now, that said, it's important to make it clear, as long as there's global trade in these products, you remain economically coupled. So even though the U.S. is self-sufficient in oil, the reality is that we trade oil. Sometimes we send crude out that gets refined elsewhere, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's different grades of oil. So the price of oil in the U.S. is still coupled to the global market. So when you see a price shock, we have physical security of energy, in a time of war. We could just be self-sufficient, but we're not. No one wants to say, okay, all oil trade by sea is done.
Right.
That would actually wreak havoc. The refineries aren't set for that. So energy security doesn't insulate you from price shocks.
Where are we in the energy transition? So let's say 20th century, we were probably more towards fossil fuels, far more in terms of penetration of the total. Where are we in 2026, and where do you see us going over the next, let's say, 25 years?
Yeah, I think break down energy use. You've got electricity, you've got heavy industry, you've got building heat, you've got transport. We have made the most progress in electricity. And in electricity, clean energy has all the momentum. Solar and wind are each about 8% of global electricity, not that big yet. But I remember when solar crossed 1%. Right. It was an enormous deal. And the cost, especially of solar and batteries, has plunged. So we're still kind of in the first inning, maybe the second inning in electricity, but the momentum, and especially the price momentum, because energy is a fungible good. You're going to buy the cheapest energy. The price momentum and deployment momentum is on the side of renewables. Renewables growth last year met all of demand growth globally, and 2/3 of that was solar. Then the second sector is electric vehicles, electrification of ground transport. That's also in its infancy, but moving quite rapidly. And again, the big lever is economics. The first time that we saw solar or wind cheaper than fossil fuels for new power was about 2015. We are now seeing electric vehicles cheaper than gasoline vehicles that are similar. We're just in that crossover point now. And so that switches the economics. We're seeing in China, not only passenger vehicles, but heavy trucks. The new like industrial vehicles being sold, heavy duty trucks, more than a quarter of those are electric. And commercial fleet operators are very, very bottom line oriented. Electric vehicles, you think about the CapEx when you're buying it, but the operational cost.
If you could just what is for people who don't know, because the audience is sort of mixed audience.
Yeah. So when you buy a car, right, you're looking at the purchase price, looking at the color, you're looking at what it says about you. Great. You might be thinking a bit about what's going to be the price to fill up this car, but that's really a secondary consideration. If you think about the total cost of ownership of a car over its lifetime is the cost to purchase the price, the capital asset, that's the CapEx, your insurance price, and fuel and maintenance. And so electric vehicles per mile driven cut fuel costs by a factor of 2 to 4, right? Because in a gasoline car, most of the energy first is just heat losses from the engine. Only about a third of the energy in the gasoline actually makes it to your wheels. And then when you brake, it's friction, and all of that is lost as heat. The electric car has like 85, 90% efficient electric motors in the wheels. And when you brake, it sucks energy back into the battery. So your fuel cost is lower. And then a gasoline car might have 1,000 or more moving parts, and an electric car has more like 10. So the maintenance cost, like basically I have an electric vehicle, and the joke among EV enthusiasts, and it's an accurate joke, is like the only maintenance is like refilling the windshield wiper fluid and every few years rotating the tires. So the maintenance costs drops by about a factor of 4. Commercial vehicles, like consumers, mostly look at purchase price. Commercial fleet operators, like they have spreadsheets of like, what's my total cost per mile? And because of that lower energy cost and maintenance cost, the more miles you drive a vehicle in a year, the bigger the savings are for going electric. And commercial vehicles get driven 5 times as many miles as consumer.
So it's just marginally more efficient. It just at its most basic.
Yeah, I mean, it's like 3 times more efficient. Like yeah.
And let me ask you this, because I've seen a lot of reporting that suggests China is much farther ahead than us in the transition. And you kind of touched on that a little. And I think you sort of suggested that there's pollution, but it's also a national security for the Chinese Communist Party, because they don't want to be dependent on sort of outside partners or allies who might be under the thumb possibly of the United States or its allies. Can you talk about where China is versus the United States?
Yeah, China is the #1 deployer of solar, wind, batteries, nuclear power plants, and electric cars and electric trucks. Okay? Now, in terms of percent of their electricity mix, solar and wind are about the same percentage as they are in Europe. And that's similar to the US, actually, but they're growing much, much faster in China. In terms of electric cars, it's a totally different story, because not only are they the biggest manufacturer of electric cars, the biggest seller of electric cars is not Tesla, it's a Chinese company called BYD. They also are the largest auto market on earth, and the percentage of sales that are electric is almost the highest in the world. So like 58% of new vehicle sales, the last time I looked, of new personal owned vehicle sales are electric in China. There's a couple European nations that are like that. In the US, it's about 10%. And so China, in many ways, is the country that's going the fastest in the clean energy transition. And I've been in the climate and energy space for 15 years. And when I entered it, one argument for not moving faster is, well, it doesn't really matter what the US does because China's not going to do it. China is still the #1 burner of coal as well, but they are the fastest in this transition.
Ramez, how do you think, and it's in predictions always a very ugly business, but let's just go for it. This little period we are, I think, probably exiting, that began maybe in the 19th century and is, you said, is peak demand is possibly as late as 2035. How do you think historians will look back at this period?
Look, I'm a climate activist and I invest in clean energy and AI. But let's be clear, like, fossil fuels are also how we bootstrapped out of poverty. The world was making progress. We had the scientific revolution and the Renaissance and all this, but it was about, the 1850s, the middle of the 19th century, when steam power came along, and that fossil fuels built our world. So they might be past their expiration date, but that's how we got rich. And I think that's how historians will look at this. And at the same time, we've known for a handful of decades now that we were causing climate change. And arguably, we haven't moved as fast as we should. And the transition is not going to be over in 25 years. I think if we're really lucky, the transition will be complete in 50 years, but it could take even longer than that. And we could use pushes on all sorts of fronts. The technology is coming along really well in those two sectors of electricity and ground transport. And we have still some work to do for heavy industry, building heat. Building heat, we're making progress too. So we still have, a number of technical problems to solve, and governments have a role to play in helping to drive those.
Ramez, do you see climate change at this point as an engineering problem, or do you? And I'll explain further. And how much, the U.S., some of the biggest economies continue emitting. We're already, I think we started with 1.4 degrees Celsius above the baseline. I agree about that. Do you see technology, particularly as we go further into AI, do you see this as a sort of multi-government initiative, as something that can be fixed? Because essentially we're going to, again, I'm a science fiction fan, I imagine you are too, there's terraforming, right? Mm-hmm. So you ever, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Aliens, but the second film, they go to this LV-246, I think it was called, or 426, and I apologize if I got that wrong. And it's raining, and they're on this rock in the middle of space, and it's raining. They're like, well, we've been terraforming. Do you see those the terraforming and climate change, particularly for Earth? Do you see those as interlinked to space travel, in terms of us having a permanent settlement, us fixing it here so that we could move on, let's say, to Mars, which, radiation and
it's a great question. I'd love to say yes, but the answer to me is no. Except insofar as, we've increased our industrial capabilities. We've increased our ability to fabricate all sorts of things, and we've brought down the real cost of all sorts of technologies and physical infrastructure and so on. And so they have the solutions that will solve climate change and the technologies that will get us off-world, both were made possible by the fact that our industrial capability and our scientific capabilities and so on have risen.
And I guess, at this point, do you think it's a reasonable, for instance, there's some people who say we should be spending resources on going to Mars. Do you see that as something reasonable for now, or do you see, I'd just be curious to understand what your view is on space travel, because we're in a new era now.
Yeah, look, I don't think these things compete for resources. In climate, it's not that the world has too little money to solve the problem. It's that investors put down money in giant solar or wind projects when they're going to be profitable. The world is awash in capital. When I think about going to Mars, I think the biggest challenge, there are a huge number of technical challenges. Right. It's actually incredibly hard. But the biggest challenge is that there's no business model for it. Like there's no way to return that capital plus a profit to the people who fund it. And so it's no accident. Steve Jurvetson was one of the initial investors in SpaceX, among Elon's other companies, and was on the board. And he has this great thing to say that he likes to invest in companies that have an enormous vision and a immediate way or a shorter term way within 10 years to make that profitable. And so the breakthrough for SpaceX was realizing that they could, satellite launch was too small a business to make SpaceX work, but communications for people on Earth was a big enough business that has dominated SpaceX's revenue up until now. And it's no accident that Elon is now talking about space-based data centers instead of talking about Mars. And he's talking about that because right now there appears to be insatiable demand for AI data center compute. And it's limited on Earth by lots of things: zoning, permitting, local pushback, the grid itself. And so space-based data centers have their own set of challenges. There's economic challenges and technical challenges, but they don't require a permit, and they don't require the utility to build you a new transmission line. And that's why that's the vision. And Elon is interested in it because it is an engine of revenue, potentially. And then maybe that helps, fund building a settlement on Mars.
And so you're sort of seeing this in stages, I imagine. I've heard of as this sort of new space race. Let's say the United States sets up some sort of lunar base as sort of a forward operating base, and maybe there's 3D printing, maybe there's other things on there to make it easier to, again, push forward out into space. Do you see this as something that in the next 25 years?
Maybe, but it's really policy driven. I don't see a strong case for humanity for going off world right now. Like, I believe in the notion of spreading light of consciousness to the stars. I believe in the notion of backup for planet Earth, but it's so technically hard. I think people are just vastly underestimating the technical difficulty of this, and our technology is not there yet, honestly. So right now, it is NASA that's going to, with the help of SpaceX and others, take us to the moon. But it's federal government spending. People make a lot of arguments for why there's benefits to being on the moon, strategic and military ones. None of them make sense to me, honestly. But I believe in exploration. So, why did the first climbers climb Everest? Because it was there.
Right.
And so I think human ingenuity will take us there, but I would soft pedal. My expectations of a permanent settlement on the moon, and especially on Mars, anytime soon, are low. I think most likely we'll do missions and landings, and the cost of a permanent settlement, it will, as long as it's government funded, it will be subject to the whims of the next administration and the one after that, and Congress, and so on and so forth. And so I don't think it's a safe bet that we're actually going to pull it off.
So really, next question really has to do with, the moment we're in. So AI, it's still relatively novel. It's a new technology. We're probably just in the opening phases of it. And there's quite a bit of reporting suggesting, and again, we don't know, but there's quite a bit of reporting suggesting that it could have a significant deleterious effect on white collar employment, as it has maybe in other places. Where are you on this? Do you think that AI is going to lead? I mean, I've heard the term job apocalypse. Do you believe that that's something that's foreseeable in the next 10 years?
Look, I think we all need to have humility on this. I think nobody really knows. I have my guesses, and I can tell you why. We don't really see it in the numbers to date. And economists will tell you that diffusion of tech usually takes a lot longer than development of tech. Mm-hmm. We see in studies that humans that are really skilled in their domain, whatever it is, get more and better use out of AI. And we've seen in the past this concept of the Jevons paradox. This is actually something from energy. Jevons was a British economist who, when people found ways to make lighting more efficient, they said, well, this will reduce the energy needed for lighting globally. And he said, that's just dumb. As if lighting gets more efficient, it gets cheaper, and that means people are going to buy more lighting, and total demand for lighting and total demand for electricity for lighting will go up. And he was right. Now in the US, that peaked at some point because efficiency just, beat human demand. Human demand for lighting is finite, it turns out. And so when you really can keep all your lights on all the time, and nobody really does, that does tap out demand. But the lesson here is that if AI makes some jobs that humans do cheaper, it probably doesn't automate whole jobs at once. It automates tasks within jobs. Yeah. It automates the tasks that most fit in a box, and it leaves the messy tasks, the tasks that involve relationships and communication and so on, still there as something humans have to do. Then we might see more demand for those services if AI has made something 20, 30% cheaper by automating away the drudgery and leaving the most creative or messy or ambiguous or relationship-oriented stuff for humans. We saw this when the ATM was invented. People said, well, that's the end of bank tellers, right? It makes sense. The ATM should end bank tellers. It didn't, because the ATM made it cheaper to open a bank branch. And so bank teller employment went up. When the spreadsheet arrived, people said, well, this is the end of bookkeepers. And bookkeeper employment did drop, but employment for accountants and financial analysts and people at financial services firms rose much more than the jobs of bookkeepers shrank.
Oh, and I think that's interesting. Okay, so I think we might be talking about let's say creative destruction to a certain extent. And maybe I'll push back just a little bit, is that maybe in earlier eras, the creative destruction was linear, correct? Whereas it appears, just again, based on my personal experience and what I've read, the creative destruction could be exponential, possibly parabolic. Do you have any thoughts on that, Ramez?
Well, look, I'll say I don't think we have unbounded growth into a singularity. I don't. But I'll say this. This is the fastest technology diffusion through society ever. It is the fastest revenue growth
ever in human history.
Yeah. I mean, AI has a cheat code. It leverages the internet that we already built, and it leverages the phones we already have out there. So in that way, it's sort of like social media. It can spread very, very rapidly. It's just like, install this app, go to this website. But you already have all the infra you need for it. You don't have to build fiber lines for AI. Right. So in terms of percent of humanity that's used it, it's the fastest. It's also the fastest revenue growth we've ever seen for any startup companies, right? Anthropic is now at about a $50 billion a year annualized run rate. They haven't made 50 billion, but if you take the last month that they reported and multiply that by 12, you get there. OpenAI hasn't updated us since February, but the last we saw, that was at more than 25 billion. So this is real stuff, and it's a very powerful technology. So what I'm certain of is there will be churn.
Yeah,
people's jobs will change. Some people will lose their jobs even as new jobs are created. The new jobs that are created might not be suitable for the people that lost their jobs.
Yeah.
So if your job is a lot of, square tasks, if there's a lot of repetitive white collar work, repetitive work on screens is the thing that is most vulnerable. And I think people who do those sorts of tasks should think about, upskilling, and should think about what part of their tasks are not repetitive, because that's where the value is.
You mentioned social media before, and I'm really curious about your understanding of community nowadays. A big challenge in American society is loneliness. And we have so much connection, right? I don't know where you are, but I'm here and we're talking and people are gonna be able to watch this. And so we can connect, right? But it's not the same though as genuine community. There is a difference there. Ramez, do you have any opinions on this or thoughts on this? Because you saw the internet really become popular. You saw the rise of social media. Do you have any thoughts on this?
It's a problem for society. I mean, I get positive value out of social media. It's, we talk about the value of weak connections or just keeping up with my friends, like who's had a baby and so on. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that facilitates a real world interaction, but not always. And the problem is generational. We see the youngest generation are like not having sex, not dating, not forming relationships, and not spending time together in person. The total fertility rate is dropping everywhere on Earth. Most of that drop happened before cell phones, before social media, but it looks like cell phones, there's a new paper out, looks like cell phones had a additional drop, and probably that was social media was probably a chunk of it. So I do think we have to figure out for our own life satisfaction, how do we maintain those in the flesh connections and interactions.
And sort of, I mean, where do there's a lot of discussion about abundance and how this new technology, particularly AI, it's going to filter downward, and there's going to be more abundance in society. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if AI makes it cheaper to design new products that you love, if it makes it possible to make cars that are better, or to make homes that cost less to heat and cool, or if AI helps in developing drugs that treat diseases that you or someone you know and care about will come down with one day, that's just increasing people's well-being overall. I will say I believe in that. Like I think there's definitely stuff that's going to happen there and is happening. I think tech has already done a lot of that. It gives us a lot of free value, and there's plenty of evidence that most of the value of AI doesn't go to the AI companies, it goes to the users of AI. We can come back to that. But we should also be clear, there's 2 books called Abundance out. There's my friend Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler, their book Abundance, which is about technology giving us all this growth. And then Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson have a more recent book called Abundance, which is about how we have to get out of the way and build, how liberalism has to get out of the way and build. Because abundance, I hate to say it, because I think Peter would disagree with me, AI is not going to drop the cost of housing. It's probably not going to drop the cost of healthcare that will give us new cures eventually. And the reasons for that is the cost of housing is dictated by supply and demand. And the thing that limits supply is not that we don't have robot construction workers. That's might be a small issue. It's that the zoning doesn't let us build. And so AI is not going to solve that. So and
that's policy and law driven.
Yeah, and that policy matters. So we have to get with it. Like technology, it's sort of like in climate change. Like technology is a huge part of the solution, but it's got to be steered by policy.
Ramez, what are smart, well-informed people still getting wrong about climate, energy, AI, and the future in general? What do you think, some of the leading thinkers today are possibly getting wrong in terms of their understanding of where we're heading?
Well, we'll find out in the future. So let me make a couple of comments. In climate, I think there are a couple of things that are probably necessary at this point that are anathema, that are just like too scary. So the IPCC originally said we should stay below 2 degrees Celsius. Now it says 1.5 C. We've basically missed 1.5 C. There's no way to slow down, to stop before 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. We're going to pass that in about 2030. There's one way, actually, but it's not reducing emissions. It is sunlight reflection. It is putting tiny particles in the atmosphere that reflect a very small fraction of the sun's heat away from planet Earth. And that is like the cheapest known climate solution by a factor of hundreds of thousands or a million. And it's also the least invested in climate solution. Or another thing, over time, ecosystem.
Is that the sulfur dioxide?
Sulfur particles are one way
to
do it. There's a new Israeli startup that plans to do it with silica particles, and there is research on other stuff, but the total research funding for sunlight reflection is in the tens of millions of dollars, which sounds like a lot, but we spent $3 trillion this year on deploying clean energy, and we should. So there's like many zeros missing from the amount of funding that we should be doing in researching this, at least.
And this to me goes to the engineering piece for the the geoengineering, whereas you're saying there's this low cost scientifically, and again, I don't want to say it's scientifically validated. I'm not sure if it is.
It needs more work. It like in principle should work, but we have to do more studies. We have to do some releases into the atmosphere, small ones, tiny ones that we can study, and those are getting blocked by people who call themselves environmentalists.
Let me ask you this, Ramez. In terms of the science in the United States, there's been reporting something like 10,000 scientists were let go. There's graduate students, PhDs, the best students from the People's Republic of China, from India, from all over the world. People come here because they believe in an American dream for themselves, right? They want to better themselves. What is your thoughts on the assault on science education, and where do you think this leads us?
It is such a self-own. It is shooting America in the foot, not the foot. It's like blowing off a kneecap. The impact of this we felt for decades. Like this could be an inflection point for the country overall. If you're running a business, you want to attract the best talent, right? And one of America's superpowers has been that we attract the best talent from around the world. And that has helped America and the world. You look at the fraction, you look at all of the Chinese scientists that have won Nobel Prizes. A majority of them did that after coming to the U.S. and working in U.S. universities. So when you take the best talent and bring them to a country that has the best systems, you get like this enormous benefit for all of humanity and for us. And so people are going to remember this for a long time. People are, making decisions that are decisions that last for decades or maybe a lifetime. And so we're harming ourselves extensively.
And Ramez, if you can just break this down just a little, make it even more granular. What happens when we get rid of people studying cancer, studying HIV, studying climate change, studying all these areas? What happens when that person doesn't get funding? They lose their job. What is this? Because what I'm getting to here is standard of living's long term.
Right? Yeah.
If you can make that clear,
they lose their job, and that means the work doesn't get done. And when we're talking about abundance and AI helping us create cures for cancer, let's say, AI is not going to do it on its own. It needs talented researchers and scientists with them. And so if we're sending away the people that could work on cancer cures, and some of them will land in a place with a pretty good lab, but most won't, most likely. So we're just doing less of the critical research that helps us improve human health, helps us come up with new energy solutions, helps us come up with, new materials that can enhance our lives. And that's just a pure loss. It will reduce the rate of societal progress, the rate of scientific progress, and the rate of American progress for decades to come.
Ramez, what are you excited about?
I'm really excited about AI. I'm excited about clean energy. I mean, solar and wind are amazing. Batteries are going gangbusters. Batteries are the new solar. Batteries are where solar was 10 or 15 years ago. Deployments are doubling every 2 years. It's just going gangbusters. There was a recent report put out with the title, "Putting Solar Where the Sun Don't Shine," which I thought was just hilarious, which is that now like a substantial, early, but 10, 15% of solar power in Texas is being used after sunset.
Okay.
Right. And so that is amazing. And that's something that naysayers would always say this is not possible. I'm excited about AI. I'm excited about AI as a horizontal tool that I think of it sometimes as like the next thing beyond internet search, right? Google just made all of our lives better in a way that we don't remember what life was like before that.
Right.
AI is way more powerful.
You don't remember Lycos or Ultra Vista? Or?
I do actually, but I'm a nerd and I worked in that industry.
Okay.
And it wasn't fun. I mean, it was fun. It seemed cool. Alta Vista and Yahoo even seemed cool.
Ask Jeeves. I mean, you can't forget that.
That's that's a deep cut. AI goes beyond that, right? You look at what people use AI for. Now the top of the list is actually a companion and an advisor.
Yeah.
You look at specific topics, personal health is actually like the top topic people use AI for.
Why do you think so? Why do you think so? A lot of people though are totally turned off to AI, the conversation, and I mean just having a conversation. The topic of AI comes up, it becomes almost controversial. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a few. I think as Americans, we have a distrust of big companies. And I think some of that is healthy. I'd rather we not blindly trust. And the most recent tech wave before AI was social media, which we all loved at first. And, I was one of the people saying social media will increase freedom around the world and it'll liberalize things and so on. And now we all see the harms of social media. It's addictive, it can be corrosive, it can lead to more extremism and so on. So you have lost trust. And so they see a new thing happening. The founders of the AI labs, Sam Altman, Dario Amodei, are out there saying this could kill huge numbers of human jobs. This is actually a threat that could, take over the world. It could possibly an existential threat that could kill us all. So that doesn't help. I mean, I think they're being honest. I don't think they're doing this to try to hype their companies. They're being honest. That's why they think this is such an important thing to work on. And then there's some kind of BS stuff. Most of the allegations of data centers using too much water and stuff are kind of BS, but they land on a populace that has already been primed with these negative concerns about AI, with jobs, with control of AI companies by the super wealthy. And so it just breeds distrust.
What do you, Ramez, what are your thoughts? U.S. tax policy. We've been sort of. I think you could maybe make the argument that a lot of our dysfunction is because of tax policy in the United States, right?
Right.
Let's just say supply side economics, and again we start with President Reagan, and then President George W. Bush's tax cuts, and then you have the two massive tax cuts by President Donald Trump. I believe one was in 2017, and then you have the big, beautiful bill, I believe was 2025. All of these have been very much centered on the extremely wealthy. And so we're seeing this K-shaped economy, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but it's something like 20% of U.S. consumers power 80% of the economy. I believe that's the figure. I don't think this is sustainable. What do you see as? I mean, it's not, because our national debt is it's more than 100%. What do you see as the end game here, Ramez?
We're in a bad state. The national debt is getting to crisis levels, and I say this as a liberal. We are now at the point where mandatory spending, meaning the entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, which is not mandatory, but Congress has made it so they auto-renew, basically, plus interest payments on the debt, that now exceeds the federal government's revenue from taxes without adding in any other domestic program or military spending, right? That, and it's the payments on the debt plus entitlements are just slated to go up and up and up. So something has to be done. And, the rational plan is to both cut spending and raise taxes. The US has low taxes compared to a lot of other places. And there's some dynamism that comes from low taxes, but we're probably not at the optimal tax rate. It can probably be somewhat higher, and we can structure those taxes intelligently. At the same time, we have to find a way to rationally deal with entitlement spending. And to me, that comes first and foremost to like, how do we figure out how to make healthcare cheaper? Not just cheaper out of pocket, but cheaper for like the whole system, for what the government.
And you're specifically speaking to the fact that we pay more for health care than any other country in the world, but we get the worse outcomes. Is that something like?
The outcomes don't bother me so much. Like those are mostly not about our healthcare system. The healthcare system produces awesome outcomes. We have negative health outcomes in the U.S. because of poverty and vices, obesity,
which could be tied to the tax policy,
maybe,
and social. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And other countries spend less on healthcare than we do, but everybody's going up. Everyone is going up in spending. My radical thought is we should actually have more of what we pay for healthcare come out of pocket. And if I was emperor for a day, I'd say like the first thing I do is say all healthcare prices have to be 100% completely transparent and consistent. No more like insurance negotiates one rate that they're going to pay, but if you're an out-of-pocket uninsured patient, they try to charge you 5 times as much. That's BS. One price posted in a human readable form and in a software readable form that lets me make decisions, and that everybody should have skin in the game proportional to price when you're choosing healthcare services. There's some amount of emergency spending that has to, you don't have if you've just been hit by a car, like you're not going to price comparison shop. That's less than 20% of all healthcare spending.
Yeah, and a lot of our healthcare spending is I believe has to do with chronic health issues related to obesity and diabetes.
Yeah,
things of that sort. Let me ask you. I mean, what are some things that you're working on, Ramez? What are you optimistic about? Sometimes on this show, and really maybe talk a bit more about what you do, because we've been talking about all these other areas, but really talk about what you've been doing and why for the environment it's important.
Yeah, I mean, I had an environmental awakening 15, 16 years ago, where I just decided to research what is the state of the planet and what's my responsibility. And the conclusion I came to is the state of the planet is like challenging, and we have enormous innovative powers. So I set out through a lot of public speaking and writing and communication and a book, and then by investing in startups to try to push solutions and educate businesses, governments, et cetera, on solutions. I still love that. That is still the bulk of what I do. But I'm a computer scientist, and I see the AI transition going so quickly that it's happening faster than climate change. And so I am motivated to try to do my part to help steer that transition as well as possible. And some of that is communication. Some of that's a lot of speaking, some writing that's coming up, and some of it's investing in AI companies where I think they actually make the world a better place.
And I get the impression that you're an optimist. If that's the case, why are you an optimist long term?
Probably my genes. I mean, I think I'm just an optimist. I think that's one part of it. Number two is I came from a developing nation. I was born in Egypt. I came to the States at age 3. So I grew up in America. But looking at like the state of Egypt versus the state of the US, I saw that enormous progress is possible. And then 3, I love graphs. And almost every graph of human well-being just goes up and to the right, since about 1850. Yeah. Life expectancy, literacy, access to healthcare, even democracy, though the last 20 years have been tough for that. Mm-hmm. So that gives me long-term optimism. But I'm what you call a dynamic optimist. There's a passive optimism, which is everything's going to be okay. There's songs about it and so on. Great. A dynamic optimism is optimism around everything is going to work out because we're going to make it work out. And we, as broadly inclusive, I think humanity, when our back is up against a wall, we tend to rally. But it's also personal. It's like, here's what I'm going to do to try to make the world better. And honestly, if you're struggling emotionally with the state of the world, getting involved in some way, it has some risks, but it's one of the best ways to lift up your feelings of optimism about the world.
Ramez, I think that's a great place to end the interview. It really was a pleasure to hear your viewpoints on all these different areas, and we would love to have you back on. Thank you so much for joining us in History of the Present with the Intellectualists and Lincoln Square.
Thanks so much, Brian. It was a pleasure.